All right, calling the meeting to order of the RMLD. This meeting of the Reading Municipal Light Department, RMLD Board of Commissioners, is being videotaped at RMLD's office at 230 Ash Street, Reading, Mass, for the distribution to the community television stations in Reading, North Reading, Wilmington, and Lynnfield. The RMLD Board of Commissioners recognizes the importance of hearing public comment at the discretion of the chair on items on the official agenda as well as items not on the official agenda. We ask that all questions or comments from the public be directed to the chair and that all parties, including members of the RMLD board, act in a professional and courteous manner when addressing the board or responding to comments. Once recognized by the chair, all persons addressing the board shall state their name and their address prior to speaking. It's the role of the chair to maintain order in all public comment or ensuing discussion. Okay. A couple introductions. We have for the Citizens Advisory Board, Jason Small. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
And Dave, will you be secretary for the Dave Talbot?
Be, yes.
Dave Talbot. Public comment. Doesn't look like there is any. And then the Citizens Advisory Board. Jason, do you want to give us an update on?
Yeah, we met several times throughout the month of April to go over the capital budget and the operating budget, which we're going to hear tonight, as well as a proposed rate case. The advisory board has voted to recommend all three for approval.
Excellent. Great.
The rate case was a little contested, 3-2.
Say it again.
The rate case was contested a little bit, 3-2.
3-2. Okay. All right. Okay, today we have the RMLD fiscal year 2019 operating budget. On April 30th, 2018, the CAB voted to recommend that the board approve the 2019 operating budget, so now we'll hear it today. Wendy?
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here to present the FY19 operating budget. And in front of you, you do have a little packet that sums it up, because there is a lot of information to follow. So I thought this year maybe we could do it in this format, and maybe it's less confusing. And then if we have questions, we can go over those.
All right. We appreciate the efforts for less confusion.
Yes. Jane, I'm ready. Okay, so just a couple highlights. The fixed costs represent 81.73% of the overall operating budget. The increase in the fixed costs from FY18 to FY19 was 1.25%. Semi-variable costs represent 18.27% of the overall operating budget, with the increase of those costs from FY18 to 19 is 7.98%. The overall operating budget increase from FY18 to 19 is projected to be 2.41%. And as of 2/28/18, which was 8 months actual, the FY18 budgeted expenses are projected to come in at 2.71% higher than anticipated due to unprecedented storm costs in March. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the page that pretty much sums everything up and puts it into perspective for everyone. This is the fixed cost versus the semi-variable cost. So what it does is show you exactly how much of the expenses we have no control over and how much we do. So the fixed costs, which are your power costs, your depreciation expense, our current commitment to the town of Reading and the other 4 towns, and then of course a small portion for miscellaneous deductions for loss on disposal of property, is 81.73%. Those are our fixed costs. The semi-variable costs of 18.27% are broken down. First, labor is at 6.66% of the budget, and then you get into your employee benefits and pension at 3.91% of the budget. So right there, you're looking at over 10.5% of the 18% remaining that is basically tied to 3 labor contracts for employees and benefits. And then you get into the remaining portion of the budget, which is 1% or lower. So, would you like me to go over each one of those?
Sure.
Okay, so the conservation expenses are 1% of the budget. Overtime represents 1%. Tree trimming is almost at 1% of the budget. You have your legal and professional services at a little more than 0.75% of the budget. Then you have your other general and administrative expenses, basically your department expenses, whatever is necessary to continue running the office, 0.61% of the budget. Customer processing fees, which is the cost of doing business, especially through automation, is a little over 0.5% of the budget. Maintenance of the building and the garages, about 0.5% of the budget. Property insurance, less than 0.5%. Then you have other operating and maintenance expenses. Once again, these are things for our operations side, to continue day-to-day operations, small expenses that they need to do their jobs, 0.40% of the budget. Maintenance of the general plant, this basically represents software maintenance or anything to do with computers, I would say it that way, 0.35% of the budget. Vehicle expense, you have 3.32% of the budget, and then we have, what I've added this year is your vehicle capital clearing account, so that shows you how much of the vehicle's expenses are actually going to capital expenses. So that's 0.30%. So really, on the operating budget, you're at 0.02% of vehicle expense. And then, of course, we leave room for hazardous materials of transformers, just in case we have some leaks, which we have had in the past, 0.31% of the budget. Your training and tuition for staff, 0.25% of the budget. Rent expense, less than 0.25%. Bad debt expense at 0.11% of the budget. Injuries and damages, which is insurances and claims, 0.05%. And of course, the RMLD and the cab, 0.03%. And your office supplies at 0.02%. So that shows you where the categories are for each expense. Any questions on that in particular in this moment? Yep.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Wendy,
Tim.
am I reading, so the FY '18, it's 8 months actual for its budget,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So, am I reading this correctly? So where the FY '19 budget's actually lower than our
Yes.
projected?
Yes, because, so FY '19 budget overall is lower. That is correct. Because, first of all, if you look at the top, the power costs are a little bit higher for '18 than they are for '19.
Yep.
Okay, they're coming down a little bit.
Yep.
And then, what we're projecting in FY '18 for the variable are actually lower than '19. So it's really coming in the power. The
Yep.
power is going down.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
what makes up legal and professional? I didn't-
Okay, so legal and professional, yeah, okay, sure. Legal and professional. So what happened is, legal, of course, is legal, and then of all your outside contract fees. So as
What are
you.
the numbers? What are the numbers? I'm looking for numbers.
Okay, here we go. So legal and professional. So in FY '18, we budgeted $472,000. What we're looking to come in at currently is $662,000. So we underestimated the budgeting, and I'll tell you why. It's because we have these placeholders for employees that we haven't hired, and as we've discussed in prior meetings.
I'm
Well,
looking
we
at I'm looking at the column that says fiscal year 2019 budget. I'm looking for the breakdown of what's in there, please.
The 811,000.
111,000?
Right, yes,
Yep.
please, thank you.
So the actual, I don't have the breakdown of what's actually legal and what's actually contract in front of me right now. I can send you that if you want. But what I'm trying to explain to you, Phil, is the difference in why the budget has changed.
Well, if I may,
ahead.
if you look at historically, the 17 budget was about 400,000, and the actual was about 850,000. So,
Right.
clearly there was more spent on probably consulting as well as legal within that. So it looks that the 18 budget, which was increased a little bit, but the year to date is actually down from 17. So we didn't use it as much, and then. If I were to surmise, it looks like 19, you put it in there because the previous 2 years have been sort of trending upward.
Correct, and we're also expecting more consulting services.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So in 17, the actual is at the 800, mostly because it was a contract year for all the labor negotiations. But once again, the placeholders for the employees that we haven't been able to hire, and that, that makes us go out and seek help because the jobs have to get done.
Because you need to be able to hire people, you need to have
Exactly.
professionals go look for them and,
That's
right,
exa-
okay, search firms.
No, we actually need some professionals to do the job.
So contracting.
Sub-
Oh, so
Subcontractors,
contract,
right.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
So
that doesn't
that's-
go
so
into
that's what's
labor,
happening.
that doesn't go into regular labor, that
No,
goes
it does
into-
not.
yeah.
Labor is just the actual people who are employed by the RMLD.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we don't have a breakdown of that number.
She has it, she's gonna have
As
to.
far as how much is legal and how
Yeah.
much is contract. I
Yes.
don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, Phil.
I'm not happy about that. I'll be honest with you.
Apologize.
I'm not happy about that. I know it will affect my vote here, because I don't see the detail on some of these, so.
I mean, I can have it for you, I can send it to you through email tonight, because we're voting on this tomorrow.
Yeah, we don't,
We
we don't,
voting this tomorrow?
Yeah, we vote on
I'd be happy
vote-
to get that
vote on both
information.
tomorrow.
to you.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
We vote
That's
on the
fine.
total
We get it to
budget.
me tonight, or
Yes.
tomorrow.
No problem.
I'll be sleeping tonight, so tomorrow is fine.
Understood.
You'll sleep better tonight, no, you're gonna get that, I think.
And I
Okay.
apologize.
I have just a question on the
Yeah.
Yes.
employee benefits and pension.
Yes.
So that's increased quite a bit as well.
Yep.
And what is the rationale for that?
So I'll explain that to you. So if you remember, the audit was postponed at length due to the actuarial reports that hadn't come in on time. So we had old actuarial reports that we were basing the budget on, and the numbers were not accurate that we based the budget on.
Sure.
And so that's the problem there.
Yep.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, Wendy, I'm trying to recall where we are, maybe Colleen remembers, with respect to the change in fiscal year, and is that going to impact the budgeting decisions and process now? I'm trying to remember the,
Currently, I believe it is not going to impact it because we're going to go forward with this as a fiscal year budget. And then, once you make your decision to change to calendar year, then we would
so
then
that's
again
still, that
present.
still has not been finalized, right?
Right, is it on the agenda for tomorrow night? It is, okay?
Okay.
And then we would present another budget in September for calendar year 19.
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah, so it basically, I'm trying to think of the mechanics of it, so it would be, tomorrow night would be approving a fiscal year budget that could subsequently be
Right,
changed and
right,
to accommodate the,
exactly.
Okay.
But
Would
we
it
do-
be cut right in half? Everything?
I think
Or
we
would
would, I think we would look at it all over again and
Yeah.
present a new budget that, we have 6 months in here and make sure that it's still in line with the way we're moving.
It's always difficult when you make that transition.
Right.
You will not be 100% accurate.
Right.
That's a given.
Right.
But, so you have to be flexible in the one-year transition.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a question. This data came out of another page,
Yes.
which we don't have here in front of us, but I just had a very simple question off of the budget for 18 versus the budget for 19 on page 93. It was the interest income. It
Yes.
went from 150,000 to projected 250,000, so
Right.
very positive increase in the interest income. Why is that? Did we change banks or
Well,
something?
honestly, no, we have not changed banks, but I honestly believe that it was under budgeted because it's a tough number to pinpoint because you don't really know what the percentage is gonna come in at, so you hate to overestimate something like that. I mean, I know it's insignificant, it's $100,000, but I looked at the numbers closer this year and going more in lines about, of how the interest is coming in, so I feel good about that number.
Okay, good. I was just
honestly.
curious.
Yes.
Our processes had changed
Yeah.
at all. Yep, good.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to the slide.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, great. So I just did a couple slides here just to put some things into perspective. So the first slide shows the budgeted net income compared to the budgeted rate of return. So looking at FY '18 to FY '23, you can see the blue lines represent our projected net income, and the orange line represents the projected rate of return. So basically, we've been trying to target 8%, and then, of course, as we've discussed, we're trying to go down to a more reasonable and responsible rate of return for our customers, down to about 6% over the next 6 years. Okay? And the second slide shows the budgeted kilowatt hours sold compared to the budgeted rate of return. And as we've been saying, it looks like kilowatt hour sales are gonna be decreasing by about 1% every year going forward. Of course, that, in this moment, that's all we can see in this particular moment. And that just shows your kilowatt hour sales, what they're projected to come in at for FY '18 through to FY '23, and how it falls in line with the rate of return as well. And the last slide, I think I've already presented this to you in a regular board session, but I think it's helpful to put into perspective, especially leading up to the capital budget for tomorrow, where the funds come from in order to fund our capital projects. So we're continuously adding to whatever it is that the net income comes in at. So you have your depreciation expense, of course, in orange. That's your 3%. That's restricted for capital projects. And then you have the gray portion is what management has decided would be the best, the appropriate amounts, I would say, to transfer to capital in order to sustain the balance of at least $1 million going forward, knowing what the projects are coming up at. And then you have your yellow portion, which is, represents other proceeds and bond proceeds that we are foreseeing that we would need to go,
Well, that's for the substation, correct?
yes, that's correct. So I just think that this helps to visualize it and see that all the money that we're making is actually going back into the system and more.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So Wendy, I'm trying to remember, I know there was some discussion at the last meeting around the the study with respect to payment to the town, and
Yes.
I know the CAB had some discussion. So currently, any expense for that would be in the operating budget?
Yes, it is there. So
is.
because we're currently, we have a commitment currently that we haven't decided one way or another about, we have put it into the budget as what it is supposed to be paid out at, the 2.51% CPI based on FY '18's number. So we
Okay.
have put that number in there.
Right, but that's not for, that's for the payment, but I mean, we also talked about a study which would take a look at, goes back
Oh,
to our-
the cost for the study?
Right.
Is not in there,
Okay,
no.
right.
Because at the time, we weren't aware that we were going to need this. By the time we finalized this budget, this discussion had happened after the finalization
Right.
of the budget. So no,
So-
we have
so
not
then
accounted for it.
And I know there was some inputs from CAB, so I think what we'd be saying then is we would be voting on the budget as it's currently constituted without any
Yes,
money included for that. If at some point the determination was we should, or we want to talk about going through that, that would be brought up for approval to the CAB and to the board for consideration.
but as I mentioned to the CAB as well, because it was a big concern, that I feel confident up through March, as much as I thought we would be over budget with the storms, it looks like we're still stabilized with our numbers, and I feel confident that this study, providing that it's a reasonable cost,
Yep.
it could possibly be absorbed within the budget, because we're not a line item budget, and since we were consistently under budget this year, it's possible that it would be absorbed.
Barring a May snowstorm.
I'm sorry?
Barring a May snowstorm.
Yes, exactly.
Barring the system blowing up.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Wendy, on the first page, when you talked about that expenses came in 2.71% higher than expected.
That's what we're projecting them to come in
Oh,
at,
okay.
yes.
So, is that 2.71% of the whole budget? Or
Yes.
just of the variable budget?
No, of the whole budget, because I think Hamid's gonna discuss this tomorrow night, but it
Okay.
looks like March storms were costing us about $700,000.
Wow,
Did not foresee,
Dave, what's your drink?
okay,
okay?
thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dave. Tree trimming is up about 150 grand.
Yes.
I just wondered what that was about.
Hamid, do you have anything to share on that tree trimming?
Yeah, we got lots of tree hazards that we can identify that we need to get those out. Also, during the storm, we had lots of branches coming out and the tree area, there's some areas that the tree growth is higher than the other areas, so we're gonna have to do something. This is just an estimate.
Would have thought the storm would have taken care of some of that for us,
Well,
right?
he did, some of that they did. We're still cleaning it. But, we have a 5-year cyclic program, but some areas that the growth is higher than that, we have to go back.
I mean, 898, I'm just wondering how many years do we think that we have to spend that level of money to trim trees every year? I mean, at some point, the trees have been trimmed, right? Yes, I know they grow.
This is cyclic.
You set yourself up for that one.
I know trees, I know the trees.
May I change?
Yes.
It's a 5-year cyclic plan,
Yep.
which means, you know, you're doing your main feeders and then you're going around, and by the time you get back, you go around again.
You mean you leave one area of the footprint, you go to another
You
area?
split up the entire territory
Yeah.
into 5-year sections, doing your main feeders first, and then you have to do your laterals. And by the time you come around to start again, it's 5 years. And what Hamid's saying is, when you're going around in that 5 years, there may be certain species in certain areas that grow more than others, and instead of coming around and starting again, you gotta go back over here and do a little bit more, then you go back and you start again. And that is forever.
Okay.
So it's your number one cause of outages, and we probably got one of the best tree in fact, we've got such a good tree trimming program, and not necessarily cost, but expanding to the 8-foot, cut, what?
Saved us a lot.
And we went to a span, per span saved us money. Every single utility in this area has all adopted our program because of how much it's cut down on outages.
Also, the exceptional rain, the years that you have too much rain, so you go faster, so you're gonna have to do estimating 5 years for average year. So then, you're gonna have to go back and get those.
There had been a request earlier this year to possibly put a small amount of money in our budget to do tree planting. Let's just, yeah, I know it's.
Yes.
So, actually, I called Mary Ellen
Yep.
and told her that we were going to join this, it's like a society of utilities
Yep.
in trees, and you participate in an Arbor Day, and you plant a certain amount of trees, and you provide education on trees. You also provide education about how your utility cuts directional pruning and the health and aesthetics of the trees. And it ends up putting in a certain amount of trees, but not, what she had asked was, how about you give us all 10,000 a year? This is more, puts back into the community through this society that all the utilities belong to, and it's, so that way it's, you're not, it's a holistic program as opposed to earmarking like Christmas lights, okay, well, how many trees do you need this year and how many trees? It's educational and everything.
So what does it provide to the towns? It provides them with what?
It provides educational tools, we don't give the town trees, it donates trees through the society, you know what I mean?
The town doesn't end up getting trees.
No, the town, it does end up getting trees.
Because one thought is, there's certain species we all know, like those Norway maples, they grow really fast, they split in a heavy snow, and pines, that if we were promoting other species that don't do that, then we prevent long-term problems by having the towns get the right kind of trees. So I don't know if that's part of this.
Well, we're just, like I said, we're interviewing a bunch of societies right now to see which one's the best, but I'm sure their master arborists and stuff would probably be working with the town wardens of what types of trees would work best. But it is investing in the trees and putting back for where while we have to remove them in order to keep the electric on, we
Right.
do realize that, we want to replicate as best we can, but we can't do a one-for-one, it's not cost
Of
effective.
course. But you know what I mean about the Norway maples?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
But I can send you some literature on the tree program. It was one of the things that Mary Ellen had on
Yeah,
her
yeah.
list when she came in.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Well, maybe in a couple meetings from now, we can have an agenda item and learn more about it and say, put out a release or something explaining this.
And Dave, if I may
Yeah.
add, now that we have the GIS completed,
Yep.
now we can enter that data for tree treatment people into the GIS. So we're gonna have a better, estimate
Yep.
of the areas that we need more attention and definitely.
Great to
Yours
hear.
really getting it, kind of the cause of it, right?
Well, that
Pod
too, but
cause.
also, just it's something we, to the spirit of helping the towns, it's something we can do.
Yeah.
It's not much money for us, but, and if we push it in the right direction in terms of where they're planted and what species, it comes out even, and especially when we're spending $900,000 a year cutting trees. If we spent $40,000 making sure the right ones got planted, maybe that pays back.
Planted under the line.
Yeah, exactly,
I'm
right.
going to cut them.
Just so you know, though, it's not just cutting, it's rolling the trucks, it's bringing in cranes. We had all of those storms where big trees come down, we have to have cranes come in. It's getting rid of wood waste. Wood waste is very expensive. They have to chip it all, and they have to pay to dispose of it. It's a pretty big production,
Yeah.
besides just trimming the tree back.
So we pay to get rid of chips? Can we
It's
not-
all part of, we pay per span, so they calculate,
It's just one of those things where there's a wood chip dump at the compost where people can get free wood chips, and it just makes me wonder if that's included in contracts where we're paying people to get rid of chips, and yet people are also looking for free chips. At the compost, it's one of those little areas of cooperation that maybe there's something the next time we do our contract.
So like what Colin said, they don't per span,
Yeah.
that's all calculated.
Yeah, I know, but they're putting a budget line for getting rid of wood waste. So we're paying them to get rid of wood chips, and meanwhile, the citizens looking for free wood chips. It's for
I
another
can-
day.
Can we
I'm gonna
move on
ask
and
Yeah, let's move on.
save this for another meeting?
Yes,
Another meeting, I agree with you.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
Well, you're going to put it on an agenda in the future.
Yep.
Right,
So,
exactly.
great.
Can I just, Colleen, did you have something that you wanted to add about Tom's question about the study? Is there
No,
something
just that, the board has the right to direct us to use the operating income, you know what I mean? That's
Oh,
what we
of
pay
course.
out, so
Right.
if they wanted to use any money that's in the operating income to do a study, they could,
Of course.
without having to revise the budget.
Oh, yeah, I didn't say revise. I said it could possibly be absorbed within the budget.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because it's
That's
not
all.
line item budget. Yes, I'm sorry if you misunderstood.
Well, it was a question, like Dennis Kelly had brought up.
Right.
It's just like, if it's not in the budget, you shouldn't be doing it. The commission has
Absolutely.
authority on the operating income.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Good.
Any other questions?
Any other questions for Wendy? Jason? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, and now we're going to the proposed rate adjustment presented by Jane.
Okay, thank you very much. As part of the operating budget, when we looked at fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19, the projected base rate increase went from 26.136 million to 27.786 million. So that increase can be accomplished two ways. One would be if we had growth in kilowatt hour sales, we would receive additional revenue. And the other is through a base rate increase. Right now, historically, we've been having flat to decreasing sales over the last 10 years. Current year, year-to-date through April, it looks like we're down 2%. So based on this budget, we projected a 1% decrease in kilowatt hour sales. So as a result of that, in order to accomplish the net income of $4.053 million, a rate increase would be necessary. So when we did the cost of service last year, we looked at some of the objectives And those were to eliminate any subsidizations between rate classes. As we had discussed, the residential class was earning a negative rate of return. And so in essence, those were being subsidized by the commercial, municipal, and industrial class. We also discussed some rate subsidizations within classes. And we developed a protocol to look at the industrial time of use, and we added a demand component to the PPCT to adjust those subsidizations. We want to make sure that we have attractive rates for our commercial customers, as well as fair rates for all class of customers. So these are some of the highlights that we talked about in 2017. If we go to the next slide, we presented two basically scenarios that to both the CAB and to the Board of Commissioners. A large portion of the overall rate increase last year was based on the increase in capacity costs. However, when we looked at scenario 1, it was a 5.6 to a 6.5% if we just did an overall across-the-board rate increase. Then we looked at scenario 3, which is trying to address some of those cost subsidizations between the rate classes. And ultimately, both the CAB and the Board of Commissioners voted for us to do a scenario 3 increase where we had slight variations, but we were heading towards a more reasonable cost of service study. With the effect after 5 years was that the residential customers would have a 0 rate of return, which means there would still be a subsidization, but at least they would be breaking even from the municipal standpoint, as opposed to having a negative rate of return. And that proposal was to be accomplished over small increments so as to avoid any rate shock or huge rate swings in any rate class. And so this is what we ended up going with as an overall increase, and I do want to emphasize that the majority of that increase was associated based on the capacity increase. So in the NEMA load zone, this past fiscal year is when we hit the all-time capacity increase, and that's rolled into these actual rates. So if we go to the next slide, we kind of have those two scenarios as options if we want to still continue on that path. Obviously, the board is voting on just a 1-year increase if they so choose. So I presented kind of the two scenarios. If we were to do a uniform across-the-board increase, it would go anywhere between a 1.7 and a 2.4, depending on your customer class. And that is all based on your usage, how the rate is designed. The commercial, municipals, and school components have a demand component. Residential is just a distribution energy, and then we have the purchase power cost. If we were to continue towards that, again, we wouldn't get to that 0 cost of service, but we would be heading it. It would be a slightly higher increase for the residential, as well as the residential time of use, and a lower across-the-board increase for the school, commercial, and the industrial. Again, they're all relatively small increases. It doesn't exceed 3%, and it's anywhere between 1 and 3% depending on how you use your power. So we kind of, if we look to the next slide, please. To tie into that last slide, we talked about the residential time of use. And the way the rate is currently filed is the time of use component is on the distribution energy component, and that's how the RMLD recovers our fixed costs associated with the poles, the transformers, how we bill and everything related to that. That really doesn't have a time of use component because whether you use your power during the day or at night, shouldn't really make a difference because RMLD needs to collect that revenue in order for us to function. So what we're proposing is to fix that component, so it's a flat rate for all hours, and then make the fuel charge as the first step the time of use component. So we would use the same fuel charge that we currently have developed for the industrial commercials. That's about a 3 cent off-peak charge and a 10 cent on peak, depending on the average fuel charge. And then down the road, we would incorporate the PPCT to be more reflective of an on and off. Right now, the way we're doing that with our commercial customers is we have a demand component that we're gradually ramping up. This current fiscal year, it was at $4. The proposed increase for next year would be $8, and then the following year would be $12. And that's really what it's costing us in terms of capacity and transmission. And so we would have to incorporate that, not using a demand meter for residentials, but more as an on-peak and off-peak, but that's gonna be in later proposals. So that's just kind of a summarizing where we would be on the residential time of use. And then the last slide, last two slides, this is the scenario one, which I believe everybody has. And it just kind of gives you a dollar impact. So if we were to look at scenario one, a customer that uses 500 kilowatt hours would see a monthly increase of approximately $1.97. Someone who uses 750, the increase would be $2.82, et cetera. And it goes through the various classes. If you look at the next slide, and I know it's hard to read the slides here, but I think you should have them hopefully on your tablets.
We do.
The scenario three, rather than if we look at just the 500 kilowatt residential, instead of his or her bill going up $1.97, it would go up $2.27. So it's just a 30-cent differential, but we would be trending towards a more cost of service with that zero return based on that customer class.
Jane, I have a quick question.
Certainly.
You said it would be phased in on that first slide?
Correct.
Over 3 or 4 years?
Correct.
So you're saying in 2019, people might only see a 0.5% increase
So
on
again,
average?
it would all depend on how the budget came in, how the power supply portion would come in, because it's the overall increase to the customers. And so what we're trying to do is, again, I'll just use theoretical examples. If next year's budget, the overall increase was a 1% overall increase. In order to achieve this gradual, we might recommend a 1.2 residential and a 0.8 commercial. And again, it's just to kind of give you the slight variation, so you're gradually gonna get to a point where you're at a zero rate of return for the residentials, and then any increases from that point on would be a uniform increase. So you're just kind of staggering how you get there as opposed to having a significant increase
In 1 year?
in 1 year.
But last year, we did have the significant increase.
And
in
again,
1
as
year.
I emphasized when we looked at that, you know, I have some notes on that. So, Wendy, if you could go back to that FY18 one. Next, one more. So of the 6.6% residential increase, so of that $5.07, over $3.14 was related to power supply alone. So that was going to happen whether there was a rate increase or not, because by
That's a
law,
pass-through, right?
we pass that through. The RMLD does not make any return on that, and we have to recover our production costs.
But we decided not to phase this one in.
You did.
Oh, we did, okay.
So that was the 6.6.
Okay.
If you had decided.
3 to 5 years.
It would
I
have
see.
been 5.6. So
Okay.
again, that was a 1% shift, and because we made some progress, if you go to the next one, Wendy, please. We're only talking a 0.3 differential. So whereas last year was a 1%, again, we're able to do it in smaller portions because we're
Okay.
doing it over 5 years.
All right,
Does that answer your question, Dave?
I think so.
It's a little tricky because of the components that make up the rate, and it's not just a one-line item where we're voting in to have, you know, a 3% rate increase. There's various components of the bill, which, you know, capacity, transmission, energy, and then the cost of operating the RMLD. So they're all differently, different increases and decreases, and when we're speaking of this, we're talking about overall increase, because that's really what the customer really wants to know.
Right.
Is what's the effect on my net bill?
So, like a residential person, next year, what would the overall
depending on what scenario, that's what those
Okay.
two scenarios, it was either $1.97 for someone who used 500 kilowatts a month to another 30 cents, $2.27.
All right, okay, thanks.
27 cents.
You, just a quick question
Sure.
from on a relative source. Do you have any sense about what National Grid or Eversource are increasing theirs? Because they're gonna face the same thing. in terms of
Correct. So,
pass-through and
yeah,
whatnot.
so, again, I'm working on those studies to try to determine the power supply piece versus the cost of operating and to kind of track those so we can have that clear benchmark from a strategic standpoint. National Grid and Eversources are 30 to 50% higher than us.
Right.
So they go out for standard offer. National Grid goes out in May and October, and Eversource goes out in January and June. And so they stagger that every 6 months, and we've been historically, consistently 30 to 50% lower than them.
That jives with my house and the other place where I have,
Correct.
you know, National Grid. It's exactly right. It's about 50% less, you know.
Correct.
Okay.
So.
Questions for Jane?
So, Mr.
Thank
Chairman,
you.
Yeah. Oh,
Mike,
we
don't
got
go
one
yet,
from Phil.
don't go yet.
Oh, yep.
My question is, the CAB had a problem with this? What was their issue? Maybe Jason can understand that?
It was just around trying not to do a rate increase this year was the main issue, and seeing if there's other places we could recuperate the 2%, you know, the 1% drop in kilowatt hour sales and maybe like the 1% increase. So there was some discussion around that. Most of it was difficult to see in the operating budget where there was room to trim. A lot of the bulk of the budget's fixed.
Right.
So there wasn't a whole lot of room to look to offset that variable, so.
Okay.
Ultimately,
Okay.
Good question, Phil.
Yep.
Okay. Do we need to vote on that of some sort? Do we need to do anything? We don't have to do anything. Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, I think we're done. Any other comments from the board?
I just have one
Chair,
comment.
Tom?
I just wanted, Jane, is there so for tomorrow, what will we be voting on? Is that available to talk about now? What do we?
Yeah, so tomorrow, in order for us to file rates, it would be imperative that you give us direction in terms of that scenario 1 or scenario 3, and then we would take those, that vote and incorporate that into the actual filed rates that we have to file with the Department of Public Utilities.
And is there a recommendation from, say, from your perspective, from the staff's perspective, in terms of?
My recommendation is to continue with what we voted on last year, to move towards a zero,
Is that
you know, a
option
true
three?
cost of, that's
Option
three, a
three.
true cost of service. I mean, the residential had gotten to -11, and we're trying to bring that back to center so that we can, again, it all fits into the future, into the financials and collecting a true cost of service and cost of production.
Is it also a point of discussion with the commercial side in terms of their expectations of?
Well, the rate was adjusting the subsidations appropriately, and so yes, the commercial was slightly going down, residential was slightly
Yeah,
going up
but I mean-
because the subsidations were off. They had just gotten out of whack over the years and needed to be brought back.
But have we gotten feedback from the commercial customers around the need to be more fair about that process? I don't know to what extent they have understanding of the
I think we
rates.
wrote an article last year on the rates, and we had a discussion in the paper about what the plan was to do.
Yeah, I didn't know if
and
some of our bigger customers have asked us to be more, you know,
Be more what?
concerned about that, which I know you are doing.
Yeah, no, I think we were pretty transparent in the
Yep.
papers as far as what we
Good.
were trying to do, and as Jane said, we didn't do it all at once, we were bringing it back in increments.
Yeah, well, I think it also fits in the discussion we had around, you know, with respect to the town subsidies around looking for more opportunities for growth and development, which starts with having rates that are appropriate, right, and not subsidizing, you know, the residential side, so, makes sense. Good, thank you.
May I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Was there any thought given to changing the time of the time of use rate as opposed to the uniform increase across both? I mean, another way to get more money from those people is to shorten the span from 7 PM to noon. And that
Yeah,
affect?
it's interesting too, because, just a little side note, which some of you may find interesting. For the first time in ISO's history, New England was subject to the duck curve, which means that our daytime load was lower than our overnight load. And that, that happened on our April 21st. So the load at 2 o'clock was less than early morning and late evening.
What accounted for that?
What they have determined, it was because, as a result of behind the meter photovoltaic, a clear day.
Oh, so occasionally on those sunny days.
And seasonally low loads. So those three factors attributed to that.
But those are a couple of days, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we are looking at things. I know there's different rate structures that you can look at. I've got people in my group looking at, some significant changes. There's a National Grid has a smart pricing rate where the rate during a peak event is different than their on-peak rate. So it goes to be like 4 times higher to encourage people not to use power.
Right.
But we would need to have the ability to measure the fact that they weren't using that power because it goes to like 53 cents a kilowatt hour during those 8 hours. So we're looking at that, Dave, in terms of it, but we have to really study shortening that window because
Right.
transmission peaks are occurring a little outside that window now. We had a peak, and again, it's seasonal, so we have to kind of look to make sure we're capturing that. We used to have a on-peak rate from 10 in the morning to 8 at night. We shrunk that from 12 to 8, and now we just have to look because the load shape of New England is changing, so we have to be cognizant of that.
Or having, since you have these meters up already, having 3 different prices for 3 different time spans. You could do that, right? Like if there's a super cheap part of the night where we're paying nothing for wholesale or very little, shape your overnight loads to those times.
Correct.
Versus 7 PM, which
Yeah, we
is.
used to have seasonal rates in place, and again, we'd have to work with the billing system to make sure that the meters, the billing system could handle it, but those are definitely options to consider.
Are you talking about shoulder peaks and a max peak in
Sure.
in each day? And,
Sure.
and
I
like
mean,
there
right.
are utilities that have that, like they program the meter to have like, you have the morning, then you have the beginning of the.
Right, there's
the
3
time of
different,
use- there's
3 different prices.
Three different prices, right,
Because it's, and that's closer, it follows more closely what your costs are.
exactly.
And that makes sense to me. But just keeping the time the same and doubling somebody's rate versus somebody else's rate seems like a kind of a, it would be nice to see other approaches to.
Well, I'm not sure that's why the time of use changed, right? The
Yeah,
time,
we're not doubling anything.
the time of use changed, repeat why the time of use changed, it wasn't,
Well, you're seeing a 7.6% under your preferred scenario 3 versus 3.5% for somebody else. So that's twice as much of a rate increase for one category of customers over another.
But it's based on the usage, for scenario 3?
Yeah. You get 7.6% for residential time of use, and you get 3.5 for commercial.
Nobody was 7.6%. The highest for the residential time of use was 2.36.
What's?
I think you're talking about the 2018 increase?
Is that what we? This is.
Yeah.
Dave's talking about the 2018 increase.
And that was related to the capacity for the state.
Okay, so that was last year's increase.
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, well. So
and what
I
about
made a mistake,
the,
didn't I?
The distribution,
Happens.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Happens. It
Happens.
does happen occasionally.
It happens.
just happens.
distribution associated with the time of use?
You delete that.
Can you tell them that, please?
Sure, Dave, again, we're trying to transition to that.
Got it.
And one of the changes that we're proposing for the residential time of use is instead of having an on-peak and an off-peak distribution charge,
Yep.
we're gonna have a flat distribution charge because we have to recover the cost of our distribution, and it's not really time sensitive.
weren't recovering distribution. So you get a break in the cost of energy because you're using it off-peak.
Right.
But we can't give a break in poles and wires and labor to keep the system going, and
That
that
is
was
true.
embedded into the thing, so that's why
Can
there's
you
a
reduce your
change.
labor rates for the time of use customers? I'm just making a joke.
Can we table that item?
Covering my mistake by making a bad joke.
When the robots run the organization. yeah.
Con Ed, by the way, Con Ed is in New York, like their day rates are like 25 cents, and their overnight rates are like a penny. But it's from like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. only. So there's interesting things happening.
Correct, and we're looking at that, one of it, as I was mentioned earlier, one of the, looks like, during a peak event, it's 55 cents
Yeah.
versus something.
So that's great.
there's ways to structure, so you're sending price signals for people not to use power.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Is the Eaton, module that we put into these old Itrons,
And make it time of use.
yeah, but when you make it time of use, can you cut it into soft peak, max peak, and shoulder peak? So we might be able to do that, because that's how California does it too,
Yeah.
they do the 3. But you have to keep, as Jane says, even if you do the 3, you have
Yeah.
to keep looking at
And what's
how
happening
it's
in the-
shifting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know
And
what I
then
mean?
change it every year if you have to. People have to learn how to act differently. Thank you.
Phil, you've been waiting.
That's all right. I just want to, we set with all that?
Oh, yes, Bob Cioli.
Yeah, I mean, I just want
absolutely.
to mention to everybody that, you know, I attended his memorial service on Saturday.
Oh, good.
I actually spoke. They're kind of like an Irish wake they gave him, you know, where people got up and spoke about him. And one of the things that was mentioned that his service on this committee was very important to him. So, you know, he served from 2002 to 2014 in one of the original 3, and that seat is now occupied by Mr. Hennessy. Actually, Mr. O'Rourke occupies that seat. He succeeded Bob Solik. And Bob Solik, for 1 year, served in another seat that was vacated after Marcy West and Dave Mancuso, and you succeeded him.
That's right. I remember
So
Bob.
Bob was a good man, and he and I butted head many times, you know? And it used to make me worried when we agreed on things.
I second that. Bob took me under his wing when I first came on and sort of taught me some of the basics and about the economics of the system, and
Yeah.
he was a great teacher that way.
Yeah, and a very solicitous for the ratepayer. He was always looking
Especially
after the ratepayers.
Elderly customers, he was very always
That's right.
thinking about
Yep.
people who needed help.
So,
A great legacy.
Amen.
Can I ask one more
Yes.
question back on the budget, just so I'm clear, Phil? So we use FERC accounting, you know, so FERC account 923 captures all outside services, okay? It's all combined. So typically, similar to overhead maintenance, tree trimmings in overhead maintenance. So the only time you break something out is when someone says, can you break apart that? But you're still gonna have a lot left in there. So we're gonna break out legal out of outside services. We're gonna break out, training is already broken out. Is there anybody else that would like something broken out of? Because each FERC bucket has a lot of things in it. So we only break stuff out if people have specific requests that they wanna know
Yep, it's a good
what
time
an
to ask.
integral,
Yep.
what an integral cost is.
Phil, it seems like that's a question for you.
the only
Is
one
there
I
anything
had,
else?
the only thing I asked was just the legal
Okay,
and professional fees. That was the breakdown.
yep.
Because I didn't see that anywhere in the package that I had.
I don't know if it was broken out in the past. Was it?
Yes, it has been.
Oh, it has. Has it been?
At least, you know,
Not that I'm aware of. Sorry.
well, I'm sorry, I've only been here 32 years, so.
That's why I said that.
Yeah, I think we did see the legal in past years because there were some extremely high rates per hour that were being charged.
Yep.
And we were wondering, I mean, on to the tune of $700 to $800 an hour. I mean, it was
Right.
like
Yeah, well, that's,
insane.
that's
So-
right.
So I guess the answer to Colleen's question is
We'll just break.
Yeah.
So just in the future, if you want
Yeah.
something else broken out, if you say, you know, well, what's in overhead construction? Or what is in, I'm trying to think of another one,
Right.
like typically people like to see the tree trimming broken out of overhead. They like to see training as opposed to, because that training is also in the same FERC code. Trying to think of another. The overtime, they like to see that broken out of labor. So like I said, if there's anything else, I mean, we're gonna, next year is the last phase, and we're gonna get into the FERC accounting, so that you can see what each one of them is, and that way, if you want breakouts, we can do it further if you want.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, just before we leave the operating budget, so Colleen, I guess from my perspective, to make sure, I know we've carried unfilled positions for different reasons, some availability of talent or just not being able to get the right people at the right time. So in this budget, do you have enough headcount covered for the needs for the budget?
Yeah. Actually, there's about 7 vacancies. It's not so much that we can't find somebody. It's more like, we did the reorganizational study on a high level.
Yeah.
And then we've gone through 75% of the groups at a lower level. And when you start switching things around, you have to work with the unions on new job descriptions, and you have to make sure that that job description doesn't go from this union and cross over into this union. So writing the job descriptions and having everyone agree on it after they've accepted the reorganization is just time consuming.
Sure. Yeah,
And
I
so
get it.
it's just,
Yeah, I'm more concerned that the budget, as stated now, has coverage for the
Yeah.
positions you still want to fill.
yeah, and I feel like we'll make a lot of progress this year, just because we're coming up on the last 2 areas that we're working on, and then we're coming up on another negotiating year. You would think that you could just reorganize, write the job description, say this is what we're doing, management can direct and control. And somebody
Yeah.
negotiated that out.
That's corporate America.
Apparently they negotiated that out long before I got here. So it's not as easy, and it's inefficient, and it's frustrating.
And
But
is it,
it's working, slowly.
and did you say, is it 7 positions now that we
There's
need
about
to-
7 positions, and we're also trying to, when you get around to reading the study that I wrote and stuff, we did the reorg, we're looking at attrition. Every time someone retires, we don't just automatic replace that.
Yeah, no,
We're
that's
seeing
good.
if we can consolidate, because even as you lessen and consolidate with new technology, I mean, we have to be 100% OSHA compliant, where we were exempt in the past. All public employees have to be OSHA compliant this
Yeah.
February. It's gonna cost some money. I mean, I want to put it,
This coming February.
yes. So we have to do an internal audit, like we have to be self-audited first, fines. I mean, it's a big, huge deal.
Yeah.
Rest assured that all of the policies and procedures that Hamid and I have put in since we've gotten here are all OSHA-based, even though a lot of people would say to me, why are we doing that? We're exempt. And I'm like, because it's good business practice, and that's what we're doing. And if there was an accident, those are the rules that the Department of Labor would use to civilly fine you or sue you. So we've been on track. I feel like we'll do well with the audit. But again, a lot of utilities are now hiring security, the security manager that handles cybersecurity, physical security, and then all of your OSHA compliance. I mean, things keep changing and jobs keep changing as technology and liability gets,
Sure.
so, we're trying to, maintain the numbers, keep it low, keep it efficient.
Yeah. No, actually, my question was more to making sure, because I know you've been running understaffed, and that has consequences over time in terms of what
Yeah.
stress it puts on the existing staff, so that's good. Good, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Jason?
all
No.
set.
Okay. Well, I think we want to move to adjourn
Move to adjourn, Mr.
regular
Chairman.
session. Okay. Second?
Second?
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. All right. We're adjourned.